Hi, I'm Jeff Braun.
Hi, I'm Ross Bentley, and
This is
No Dumb
Dumb
Questions.
Question.
Something like that.
Oh, I like your slow. That's maybe we should do a question. That was good.
Question. Yeah.
Questions. Okay, that might get us on time. I like that.
Yeah,
I like
maybe,
that.
but I doubt it.
Probably not. Probably not.
Yeah. So another episode of fun stuff here. Yeah.
Yeah, I can't wait. It's pretty cool. We've been getting lots of undumb questions lately.
Yeah.
I'm ready for them.
But don't if you're listening to this, for that one person that's listening to this, don't think that we have too many and we can't answer your questions. Feel free, if you're listening to this, to send us your questions. It's fun. It's fun when we get to just kind of go, oh, that's an interesting one, isn't it? Yeah. And we do have.
Yeah. Or I like the ones when I go, oh, I have no idea. I don't know the answer to that. This is bad. Those we just push off to the side because we act like we know all the answers. But the ones that we don't know the answers to, we're never going to answer. So
yeah. There you go. So if you send us a question and we never ever answer, it's because we don't know. I guess that's
right. We're just not smart enough. Right.
Yeah. But I got a really, really interesting, kind of almost a two-parter one here for you, Jeff, from Albert in Barcelona, that's cool.
Wow.
Yeah.
Cool. One of my best friends in all of racing was from there, Fermin Velez.
Yeah.
I got to spend a lot of time in Barcelona with Fermin and his family. And scariest thing I ever did in racing was ride with Fermin Velez on his scooter through the traffic in Barcelona to go to dinner. That is death defying. I can tell you that. So
I can only imagine.
It's terrible. Albert must know all about that. Anyway, sorry.
Okay, so Albert asked, and this is related to karting. So he says, I usually compete in rental karting championships in my region, and I see a lot of people leaning their body to the outside, to the outside wheel while turning, at least in some corners. I'm in a Formula student team, and I know some vehicle dynamics, and to increase the overall grip of the go-kart, the good thing would be to do the opposite, as the exterior wheels are already very loaded, and the interior wheels can give you more grip gain. This says the theory, but there are some very fast guys who do so. So I don't know if it's really a bad idea to lean to the outside or not. Maybe, although the grip reduces, you help the go-kart rotate, and this helps you through the corner, and hence you really gain some tense doing this. I would like to know both your opinions, which first thing I'm going, man, this guy does know some stuff here. Like Albert,
Exactly.
he's a smart guy asking a very smart question. So that's the first part.
Exactly.
So I'll let you kind of jump in there, and then we'll kind of address the second part.
All right. So fortunately, I had I got a bunch of experience in karting after I had been doing a lot of race car engineering and at a fairly high level. So back when I was doing like the Ferrari GT cars and Ferrari 333s and had done a bunch of IndyCar stuff at the Indy 500, not that I was an expert in race engineering by any means, but I'd done it at the Indy 500, at Daytona, at Le Mans. And then Colin got into karting when he was 7 years old. And so we went karting. And I started to apply hey, I know, I can make an Indy car go around the Indy 500 track pretty fast. How hard can this karting thing be? It turns out it's really hard. Like the worst thing for Colin was having a dad that knew something about race cars to help him with his go-kart. It was horrible. Poor kid. We finally met up with a family, the Coelhos. People in karting know them. Nikki was probably one of the best kart drivers in the world at the time, racing against, super quick guys, people that were world-class Formula, Super A drivers and stuff like that. And his brother, Tony, were really good at karting, international level. So they helped me out. First thing those guys taught me, and we learned as we went karting in Italy and Japan and things like that, and that Albert would have to understand is a kart works completely different than a car. And I'll try to, shorten this to the basics of a kart, because it has no suspension and it's very wide for its wheelbase. You have 55 inches at the rear wheels, from outside rear wheel to outside rear wheel is 55 inches. That's longer actually than the wheelbase a lot of times. So you have this very solid axle. There's no differentials, there's no springs, there's none of that. The only way to get a go-kart to turn is you have to really unload the inside rear tire and make it a three-wheeler. Then it turns quite easily. If you don't do that, the thing's just going to understeer like crazy and you'll be slow. And so how do you get the inside rear wheel to turn? Well, a lot of things affect it. The flexibility of the chassis, the flexibility of the axle, and how much it flexes depends on a lot on where the weight is. So a lot of times you'll move the weight. And one of the primary tuning tools we used in karting was weight placement. And we did that mostly with the driver's seat, with the seat. We used to buy seats 10 at a time because a seat would last one weekend, because you drill so many holes in it to move it up, down, forward, back, that at the end of the weekend, you threw the seat away because it was like Swiss cheese because it had all the holes in it. So, because that and the stiffness of the rear axle were the two major tuning tools. And so the reason you're seeing those guys lean to the outside is to change the flex, the amount of flex of the chassis and the rear axle, to either pull that inside rear tire up more or keep it flatter, to make the handling change the way you want it. You'll even see drivers, watch the top pro kart drivers. They sit very far back in their go-kart, and I'm not talking rental karts now, but in top pro level CIK karting, they'll sit very far back where their elbows have just a slight bend to it. And then when they turn, a lot of times they'll actually lock their elbow so that you now have made the whole chassis stiffer, because if you picture, you've now triangulated the chassis from the front steering, up through the steering shaft to his hand, through his locked elbow, into his shoulder, down into his hip muscle, into the rear of the chassis again. Or you can unlock your elbow just slightly, and suddenly the chassis becomes much softer. And so you'll see drivers turn and lock their top elbow or keep it flexed a little bit, depending on how they want to change the flexibility of the chassis and lifting that inside rear tire. So leaning to the outside, depending on the kart you have, might actually lift that inside rear tire a little more and make it turn better and not be so understeery, especially with go-karts. They have very little power. We've talked about momentum machines. I don't care. Even the most powerful go-kart is still underpowered for the grip it has. So you can't have it be understeery and dragging that inside rear tire and bogging the motor down. So that's why those guys are leaning that way.
It's I think one of the best demonstrations of that whole thing, of especially like the solid rear axle, is go and push a go-kart, like push it and then turn the steering wheel and try to push it, like the thing comes to a stop.
Stop. Exactly.
Yeah. And so unless you can unload, or you take, like you said, turn it into a three-wheeled vehicle, it just wants to slow down, right?
Yep. It's also why people always wonder why go-karts have so much caster in them. They'll have 15, 18 degrees of caster in it. Well, in your example, take a go-kart, put it on the ground, and turn the wheel to lock and rock it. It becomes a three-wheeler because the caster unloads that inside rear wheel. Because if you didn't have that much caster, you'd never unload the inside rear wheel and it would understeer like crazy. So it's the same thing. Sit a go-kart, don't put anybody in it, and just turn the wheel all the way to one side. Now it's a three-wheeler. It'll bounce on three wheels. And so if you understand that part of it, then you understand the vehicle dynamics of a kart are entirely different than a car. there's still some similarities. Caster still does the kind of the same thing in a car as in a kart. Springs, there's some spring rate to it and things like that. But man, it's all about how you load that rear axle. I mean, different stiffnesses. We would carry 10 different stiffness rear axles with us. Hubs, the wheel hubs, long ones and short ones, to make the axle stiffer or softer, flexier, depends on, the grip level. So leaning to the outside is not always a bad thing. It could be a good thing depending on the grip level, the kart you have, the tires you have, all of that.
So Jeff, the first thing that sort of comes to mind when you're talking about that, I'm going, driving a kart is more like riding a motorcycle, where your positioning of your body makes a big difference. And like you said, locking the elbow, I mean, things like that. Whereas in a car, the goal is to have the driver, locked into the car and be part of the car and not move whatsoever. Because when your body is, it's a solid thing in the car. Like the worst thing you can do is have a car that when you go around a corner, you're falling out of the seat. And
right,
you want to be like actually attached to the car. So it's kind of the opposite that way. And like I said, more like a motorcycle, right?
Yeah. And what Albert is seeing is it's a rental kart, right? So you can't show up with your drill and move the position of the seat in your rental kart. If
you just get kicked out. Yeah.
You just get kicked out. Right. So there's a reason they're doing that, to go fast. The fast guys are doing that. What you would do is, if you were in a real racing kart, racing at a high level in karting, those guys don't move their body. The top pro kart racers, they don't move their body around in the seat. What they would have done in practice, if they need that kart to unload that inside rear tire more, they would have actually raised their seat up. They would have raised the seat up to get more load transfer to the outside to unload that inside tire more. Then they'll sit back in that seat, and they are tight in that seat. I mean, some of those seats are like, it's amazing you don't break their ribs when they get in there. And then they'll sit way back, and they sit in that thing, and they'll hold their head very straight up, and they just turn their hands. And but they have the seat positioned where they want it. The rental kart guys are positioning their body where it's more advantageous, because they're not allowed to put the seat where it should be.
So that, I guess, maybe leads a little bit to Albert's kind of second question here. He said, people usually say that you should put your seat forward to reduce understeer as you get more grip in the front tires. But this shouldn't be the case, because you have more moment of inertia and more weight in the front, hence more understeer. I think this is just a misunderstanding among people who haven't studied vehicle dynamics, but maybe it's not that easy, and there's some other side effect I can't think of. I think the best to do would be to put the seat as close to the center of gravity as possible, but I would like to know if then moving it forwards would lead into a more understeering car, or the opposite.
Another great question, and something that caught me out. I was the same. I thought what Albert thought early on. I was like, okay, well, I know where to move the weight. And it was oftentimes backwards, again, because it affects the flex of the chassis. Depending on the chassis you have, the grip level of the track, especially, like a kart on a very low grip track, the changes are completely opposite of what you would do on a high grip track. On a high grip track, you can get a go-kart over gripped, where you actually need to take grip away from the rear to make it quicker. So moving the seat forward or rearward, a lot of times it even depends on what kind of kart you have, how stiff the back of the kart is. There's some 4-rail karts that are very stiff back there. So you need to really flex them more. So sometimes moving the weight back actually makes it freer, because it flexes the rear of the kart more, because you're loading the rear of the kart more. Or moving it forward, the driver forward can change the flex of the front of the kart. Some karts have we called it a front axle, but it's a tube basically that connects one kingpin spindle to the other. And you can take that in and out of a lot of karts. They have a clamp and it takes that bar out, kind of like an anti-roll bar in a car. You can take it in and out to change the flex of the front of the kart. So moving the weight forward changes the load on the front or the back of the kart more than it changes that moment of inertia that Albert's talking about, which is much more influential in a car, that moment of inertia is. And he's exactly right. But it doesn't, like he said, there might be something else going on. That's what's going on. It's all about the flex of the chassis and how stiff it is. You'll see another example is the seat normally has two posts that come up from the chassis to bolt the seat in at the back of the seat. People will add seat stays, actually bars that go from the seat down to the bearings of the rear axle. And sometimes you'll see as many as 4 extra bars going from the bearing to the seat, including the 2 that are normally welded to the chassis, because they're trying to change the flex and the loading of the rear axle of the go-kart to change that handling and the 3-wheel effect that you're getting. And the weight, 4.5 weight, does exactly the same thing. Up and down weight, you would say, everything Albert knows about vehicle dynamics, well, you want the weight as low as possible. Man, we used to run a lot of weight at the top of the seat, to make the minimum weight. You might have to have an extra 20 pounds or something like that. And sometimes we'd run it right at the top edge of the seat and have Collins sitting up 2 inches off the bottom frame of the kart to get the weight to transfer enough load to pick up that inside rear tire the way you want it. So it's crazy. Karting is crazy.
Yeah. So would I be accurate in saying, and this is, I'm hoping I'm going to set you up for our classic usual answer of it depends, but is it one way to think about it is in a car, you want as much or as little load transfer as possible. So you keep the weight on all 4 tires as close to equal as possible, because that's where you get your maximum grip from. But in a kart, you kind of sacrifice that to get the thing to turn because it has no suspension and it has a solid rear axle.
I would say that's very, very true. If a kart had a differential of some sort where it unlocked the 2 rear tires, everything would change.
Yeah.
But it doesn't. So you're dealing with, one of the big tuning tools we used was the width of the rear tires. Yeah. You usually have a maximum. When we were doing it, it was 55 inches, whatever that is in European measurement, but metric. But we were at 55 inches outside to outside. But you could be less than that. Sometimes you'd run 48 inches, narrow the thing way up because it changed how much you unloaded that tire. And so it's all about the fact that you have that big, solid rear axle that you don't have in a car. And then you don't have springs and shocks on each individual corner. You have the whole chassis twisting and the front twisting independent to the rear. So it was comforting to know that once, I was going to say I figured it out. I never really figured it out. But once I had smart people like the Coelhos telling me how this whole thing worked, and then the smart people at the factory karting teams in Italy and Japan that we worked with, it was nice to know that the physics still worked, that physics didn't change when you went to Italy, that the physics weren't different in Italy than they was in the United States. And so the physics was there. You just had to understand why what you thought was working or should work wasn't working. And then once I understood that, then it made all sorts of sense. And I think, Albert needs to show up at the rental car place with his Makita drill and his bolts and sneak his seat where he wants it.
Yeah. Well, Jeff, that's cool. It's cool because first off, it kind of points out the differences between karts and cars. And I think for somebody listening to this, you can kind of go, oh, now I understand how cars work better by the way you described it here, with how it works with karts. And the other part is what you've done is you've really put out there the secret to Colin's success is he drove a lot of really bad karts, and that made him really good when he was in a car. So there you go.
That's exactly it. So I was really good at giving him bad setups to drive. So he figured out how to drive around the mistakes.
Right.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I got one for you, Ross. Well, I don't. Sean does, but that he sent. And this is something I remember, speaking of Colin, I remember you actually working with him on. So Sean says, when setting up for a turn, if there's room, I usually place my car at the edge of the usable track, including unpaved surface, and start my turn in from there. I see others intentionally starting a little more mid-track, swinging the car out, thus preloading the suspension, then starting true turn-in. Examples include, we're going to take a turn 4 and seemingly most Indy ovals. I believe part of the reason Indy cars do it is to break the draft. I think he means from the wall.
Yeah.
What are the trade-offs in the two techniques? Starting as far outside as possible seems easier, more reproducible, and would seem to be preferred when the traction at the track edge isn't great. I gather the preloading technique must be helpful since so many use it.
So
that's a good one. I want to hear the answer.
Yeah. So what's interesting is just a couple of years ago, Colin and I kind of had a conversation about this, and I was kind of challenging. When I'm at a track and Colin's racing, I'm always keeping an eye on him and kind of going, could you do something better here? And then, I remember having this conversation about, could you use more track here? Could you turn in a little crisper here and that kind of thing? And it's kind of all related to this. And, first off, as a general rule, and works 99% of the time, is the larger the radius, the better. So yeah, using all the track on the entrance corner is a good thing. And I think Sean is saying that no matter what, whether you drive down the edge of the track, parallel with the edge of the track and turn in from there, or you kind of come up to it and you kind of swing out to that outside edge and then turn in. And so let's assume that both of them are turning in from the same point and using all the track on the entry. The difference is whether you're coming down sort of parallel and making one turn in, or you're coming from a little bit off of the edge of the track, kind of swinging out towards the edge and then turning in there. And I actually just not too long ago was kind of revisiting this, and some stuff I was writing as well I used to use this analogy, and I've used this analogy this is one of those things that I, dreamed up teaching some high performance driving course decades ago, is imagine taking a piece of thread and you've got, each end of the thread in your hands. So one in your left hand, one in your right hand. And you take that thread and you kind of very gently, like you start pulling it apart slowly, and you pull it apart slowly and slowly and slowly and slowly, and still until eventually you pull it apart enough that it snaps. Now, take that same piece of thread, another one, same kind of thread, and then take it and go snap and pull it really quickly and kind of snap it. Well, it actually takes less effort to snap the string if you do it quickly. Well, think about that in terms of your tires. If you come up to a corner and you take the steering wheel and you very quickly go, and you quickly turn the steering wheel really hard, it's like snapping the string. Whereas if you come up to that corner and you gradually turn the wheel into the corner, you're giving the tires time to kind of build up their grip, build up to the cornering forces, and they hang on longer, like you're pulling the string more slowly apart. So that's kind of the way I think about the way you want to do that. So, take this to an extreme, come up to a corner and turn the steering wheel really, 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 really slowly. Of course, by this point, you're in the wall, right?
Right.
So you could go too far with being slow with the turn in. But that's when a driver kind of comes up to it and just arcs it out a little bit just before the corner, as Sean says, preloading the suspension, it's kind of, in a way, it is kind of preloading the tire. It's telling the tire what you're going to do. And Rob Wilson, who's a coach in the UK, and he's worked with a lot of Formula One drivers, coached a lot of Formula One drivers. Remember Rob and I talking back Sebring decades and decades ago when he was coaching a Skip Barber, and I was doing some stuff there as well. And so a few years ago, I had Rob on my podcast, on this podcast, and you could go back and look for that episode. I don't remember what number it is, but
Yeah.
Rob talked about that because that's one of his things that he really pushes is, and the way he put it is, tell the tires what you're going to do before you ask them to do it. So it's the same kind of thing. You come out the corner, and if you're kind of gradually turning into the corner, you're telling the tires, I'm going to turn to the right here. And as opposed to come up here and going, we're going to the right. And I think that's what's going on here is some drivers will do that. And, the conversation had with Colin, I can't remember which track we were at, trying to remember where we were, but I'd seen him sort of come up to a corner and kind of gradually turn into the corner and then turn sharper. And, I know that works a lot of times. Sometimes it doesn't. So my question to Colin was, is that working for you? And he said it really was. It was really helping him. But there's also a very fine line between what I call crabbing into a corner or sort of creeping into the corner, where I'll see somebody come up to a corner and like 3-4 car lengths before the turn-in point, they start gradually turning in. And now at the turn-in point, their car is 4 feet, or a meter or two away from the edge of the track when they're turning in. So they've reduced the radius of the corner. Mm-hmm. And, while yes, they're giving the tires some warning and they're giving the tires a chance to build up the cornering force, they've reduced the radius so much that it sort of negates the advantage of that. Colin was doing was just before the turn-in point would just start to put a little tiny steering in and then turn. But it wasn't, a car length or 2 or 3 before the turn-in point. It was maybe half a car length or so, just enough to kind of tell the tires, we're going to turn, now we're turning. And
got it. Would that make, is it kind of like I'm thinking right now, you could, in my data system, what I should do is write a math channel for steering rate, not just angle, but degrees per second.
Yeah.
Because it sounds to me like that first little bit would be a little slower in degrees per second. And then you increase the pace of degrees per second. So you could actually see if it was a little slow and then the steering rate got quicker as you turn to the apex. Is that kind of it?
Yeah. Would you please write that math channel and and give it to me too? Because
you could do that pretty easily. You just take steering angle and do derivative of it. You have rate in degrees per time. Yeah. Huh.
And because we've got to throw one of these in here, it depends. Because for sure, it's something that I'm going to say that in the last couple of years in my coaching, I've spent more time focused on is the rate of steering input. Because I think about it is Jeff, you're, one of the guru things that you do is with shocks, and all about linear and digressive and progressive shock rates. I think the same thing applies to steering rate. There are some corners that you want a linear turn in. There are some that you want a progressive turn in. There are some that you want a digressive. You want to start off quickly and then slow it down a little bit. Others where you want to slowly turn in and then speed it up a little bit. Some it's just the same rate. And, so it's not just where you turn into the corner, but it's the rate of the rotation of the steering wheel that makes a difference as well. And for sure, that's if you're early in your development as a driver, there are other things, more important things to be focused on. But when you get to a level like Colin, he's thinking about that, and maybe not even thinking about it. He's just doing it and going, that feels better. That works better, without even really being aware of it. But it'd be really cool to put his steering trace and other drivers like Colin, and look at a math channel like that, because I think for sure you would see differences. And
that would I'm thinking from a car setup standpoint. I remember, Sean actually talked about the on the ovals, and I remember running Michele Alboreto at Indy, and he came from Formula One, so he didn't know the oval tricks or whatever like that. And into turn one, a lot of guys will do that. They'll come down the straightaway, they'll actually turn right a little bit, and then turn in real quick, because the wall actually moves away a little bit there. And you've driven that, right? And so the turn actually gets wider. So they'll do a little bit to the right to get that extra half a car width of room or something like that. But it loads the suspension the wrong way. Then you have to get the momentum to stop going to the right and get it back to the left. And we played with a bunch of shock settings to get that to feel comfortable so that you could take advantage of that. Because if the shocks weren't right and you didn't have that reaction to be able to take that right left, it was way worse. And so I guess the tire, whether that slow preloading, back to that now, the slow preloading you were just talking about, would be, whether that was advantageous, would be much affected by the tire itself, characteristics of the tire, plus the shocks and springs and bars, all the setup and everything, probably the grip of the track, all of that kind of thing. It's like everything else. I guess it's all related. But to me as an engineer, it makes sense. Boy, I don't like a driver who shocks or snaps, as you said with your thread explanation, into something. I don't like him doing that to my car, because it's hard for me to control that.
Yeah.
I can control slower inputs with my shocks and springs and bars, but those quick ones are hard to control. And then the tire gets, that we've always talked about, that tire curve. It gets that big peak shock, and then it's back into the curve. And, generally race cars don't like to be shocked or snapped. So it kind of makes sense.
So I got to ask, how was Michele at Indy? Like, what was his steering? Was he coming from a Formula One car, really crisp? He's driven, road courses. He's not driven on a big super speedway kind of thing. Was he?
Yep.
Did he have sort of quick hands on the entry? Do you remember?
Nope. I do remember that. I was amazed at how smooth he was.
Yeah.
And we even talked about that. And I said, so how? I said, he was fast. We were in the top 3 or 4 cars all month. So he was fast. And those were the days. That was the year that even today would have been 90, early 90s, 2, 3. It's when the record was still set. The one that Lyondike, still the fastest lap ever at Indy, was done that year. And so that's when we were running. So these cars were fast, the fastest ever. And he was very smooth. And I said, I don't know, we got talking about it. And he goes, the most, as a little backstory, the most daunting corner in Formula One in those days was Tamburello.
Yeah.
It was a high-speed left-hander, flat almost, kind of, depending on your tire. And it was like the most hair-raising, nervous. And Michele goes, he goes, Indianapolis says it's really not that big a deal. It's Tamburello 4 times every 40 seconds. And I was like, woo-hoo. And he goes, that's what it was. And he said, you could not, at Tamburello, you had to be very gentle. You couldn't snap the car because it would spin. And that's how he treated each corner at Indy, was like Tamburello. So he wasn't as good as he was for not thinking about that stuff. And that's kind of how he did it. Nice, slow hands.
Well, and this, that kind of backs up the, if you want to be a great road racer, go and drive ovals because you get
Yeah.
really good at that kind of loading the tire the right way and gently and all that kind of stuff. Well, you do, or one of two really bad things happen. You crash, or maybe even worse,
Right.
you're slow.
They're slow. Right.
Right.
And I thought, go ahead.
I was just, the last thing I'm just going to touch on that Sean asked about, he mentioned specifically turn 4 at Laguna Seca. And turn 4 at Laguna Seca, if you drive up to it, you can increase the radius of the corner by turning in from off the entry curbing, the curbing on the left-hand side on the entry to the corner. Your turn-in point is there, but you don't want to be driving up along that curbing for a length of time. So you kind of come off like you're approaching it with the tires just next to the curbing, and then towards the turn-in point, you just kind of ease it over onto it and then turn in. And so there is a little bit of that, as well as, some of it depends on what's there on that edge of the track. So,
right. Big difference. To me, the one thing that I took away from that is there's a big difference between that little preload slowly and shying away or crabbing into the corner. I see a lot of people do that. And that's bad. I would say definitely bad. Definitely bad. Don't do that. So if you catch yourself doing that, really understand whether you're crabbing or shying away into the corner, or whether you're doing that for a reason, for the preloading. Because I would say the majority of the people are doing it because that seems to be a common thing, crabbing into the corner for some reason.
Well, and I'd say the reason is that because what's out there on that outside edge of the track are the big scary monsters. Follow somebody on a highway, follow somebody on a mountain highway, and they will come up to the corner and they will creep into the inside edge of the corner as soon as they possibly can. And as you know, some people creep in so far that they cross the center line if they're going in that direction, right?
Yeah.
Because it feels safer because you're farther away from what could happen out there on the outside. So yeah.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
So Jeff, I want to ask you to kind of wrap this episode up with going back to 2 episodes ago, episode 16, the question around a driver that was he weighed more than his competitors. So you talked about what he could do. And so we had a kind of a follow-up question from Ron, who asked, he said on the last No Dumb Questions, you talked about a larger driver coming at it from the angle of overweight for his class. That was good info and could have applied to me, as I'm the same size as that driver. However, I'm about to start racing again in NASA German Touring Series, which is straight power to weight. I'm not actually overweight for my class. Others are generally ballasted up. I'm wondering how much of a disadvantage it is to have all that weight in the driver's seat of a 3,100-pound BMW instead of distributed around the car as ballast. And more importantly, how to minimize the impact of even side-to-side weight. Funny how this kind of relates back to the kind of the karting thing in a way, but yeah. It
does, yep.
Yeah.
Well, it's a really good question because, the first thing, unlike karting, like we just talked about, those guys, so Ron's at a little disadvantage, even though he weighs the same as the other guys. His car and driver weigh the same as the other guys. Those other guys can put their weight where they want it. So they can make, I'm assuming, I don't know exactly what the rules are, but if there is no rules and you just got to weigh 3,100 pounds, then they could put lead sheets on the floor of their car or under their car and get their center of gravity much lower, which would be better than having your body in a seat sitting up high. So they would have a handling advantage through all the things that we've discussed many times before. I think everybody probably, we don't have to get into why the lower weight is better, but everybody kind of knows that in a car, not a kart, it's always better to have the weight as low as possible. It's better on the tires. It makes more grip. It does all good things. So he's at a little disadvantage there. Again, like we talked in our other episode, if he can lower his weight as low as possible, make sure his seat's really low, he's not sitting on a big pad, get him down as low as possible, all good. But then he talked about side to side, because it's not a formula car. He's sitting on, I assume, the left side, but whatever. He's sitting on the left or the right-hand side of his car. And another person could put his ballast in the passenger side to balance out his body weight. But Ron can't, because he doesn't have any ballast. He is the ballast. So what happens is his corner weights end up being different. Again, the 51, now I'll go higher than that. The 95% of the time, you want your front wheel weights to be the same. So if you put your car on scales, you would like both front tires to read the same on those scales. It'll make the braking more even. It'll make the handling more even. It does a lot of good things if you can get those fronts even. The rears might come out different, but that's generally okay. As long as the fronts are close, you won't be, if one front tire is weighs 100 pounds less on the scales than the other, and you put on the brakes, that one's going to lock up first when you're braking in a straight line. You don't want that. It's going to pull to the side under the brakes of the heavier tire. You don't want that. You don't want to be fighting a tendency to pull one way or the other with the steering wheel, all of that. So if you could distribute your weight evenly around the center line of the car, side to side, as Ron says, that's an advantage, because your corner weights would be equal. One of the things Ron could do is he could put his car on the scales, and he could change the spring platforms, if he has platforms, if they're adjustable, like coilovers, or he could put shims under a spring to tune the front weight so that they were more equal. That would reduce his disadvantage of having all of his weight on one side, or a preponderance of his weight on one side than the other side. So that's a possibility. I would look at that and see what you could do to tune those, again, shims under your springs, or whatever, however you can tune the cross weight in your particular car. On a race car, you usually have coilovers, and you can adjust your spring platforms there. The other thing is, look at, again, your seat position. Are you really sitting as close to the center of the car as you can? Maybe you can move your seat over a little bit. And yeah, maybe your legs are kind of, you're a little cockeyed in there, where your butt's at the center and your feet have to kind of go to the side to get to the pedals. But if you can move, if you weigh 285 pounds and you can move it over 2 inches to the center line, I can't tell you how much of an advantage that's going to be, but it's better closer to the center than it is way over to the, leaning against the door. So that's another thing you could do. And Jeff, again, there's no substitute for. Go ahead.
No, I was just anything that you could do to, if your battery, if you can mount it in the opposite side of the car, if assuming it's not already, just look at every little thing like that you could take to, if one side of the car is heavier than the other, try to move things around as well, right?
Exactly. Your battery, if you run a cool suit, make sure that's, opposite of where you are. Yeah, your data system, anything you can do.
Fire system, yeah.
And then, yep, the fire bottle, exactly. And this might seem strange, but I've actually done this within the last 6 months. I had a car that, I'm not going to give, I shouldn't give any secrets away, but I had a car that was at the weight limit with no ballast in it, none at all. So we could just barely make weight. And we didn't have any lead or any extra, it was like everything, we're like 4 pounds overweight. That's it. But I wanted to change the weight distribution. I was like, man, I wish there was more again, I'm not going to give things away, front or rear. I wish there was more front or rear weight. I had one of them in mind that, man, I really wish there was, because I know it would handle better if I had that. And so I actually added weight to the car in the place that I wanted it, making my car 15 pounds overweight. But I added 15 pounds of lead to the car in the place I wanted it, and I went faster. So I ran my car overweight because the weight distribution offset the extra weight. That doesn't always happen. That, I would say, that usually doesn't happen. But don't be afraid for, like, Ron, I don't know, give it a try. Maybe put 20 pounds or 30-pound hunk of lead in the passenger seat. If the weights are so far off that that's affecting your handling a lot, and carrying around an extra 20 pounds balances the car and makes it handle a lot better, maybe you go faster. So don't think that might not work.
And that's really interesting, coming from a guy that I've heard say pretty much always, lighter is better.
Lighter, yep.
Yeah,
unless, it's a unique situation. Unless the way the car was built, or the tire that is now on it compared to the tire it was designed for, is so different. It just needs, that's the times I always say, oh, you have to trick the chassis or trick the suspension. Yeah. You have to do something that just goes against your thinking. That just shouldn't be right. And then there's more to it. Then you go, okay, I'm carrying an extra, 15 pounds around. It handles better for one lap. But what about tire degradation? Now I got to stop that, more load into the tire. I got to turn that, more load into the tire. I got to accelerate that, more load on the rear tires. Now, do my tires degrade faster than my competition? Do I really want to carry that weight around? It's not straightforward.
Yeah.
But, I could see if your car was way off, if Ron had 200 pounds difference in his front corner weights because of that weight, I'm not so sure that a little bit of extra weight to reduce that might not be a better thing.
Yeah.
I would give it a try.
And 20 pounds or 40 pounds in a 3100 car, percentage wise, might not be might not be terrible. I would first try to get it with spring perch and normal corner weights, but that was just kind of one of those out there things that I revisited after learning that lesson 100 times. Lighter is always better. I still must have not, after 30 years, got it through my head. So I tried it again 6 months ago. Well, okay, cool, Jeff. Great that we had this kind of a follow-up question there, and I really like that one. So
that was good.
A little bit longer episode this time, but
good.
I don't know about you, but I had fun doing this. So yeah.
Me too. We can keep going. We probably ought to just stop this one and do another one sometime.
Oh, I got an idea. Yeah, let's do
that. Okay. This won't be the last one then ever.
Yeah. No, yeah. Good. Okay. Good. Well, thanks for listening, everybody. And, as usual, keep learning, keep having fun.
Yep. Go fast and have fun. We'll talk to you next time.